The night Samuel broke his chains, the sky wept red. He didn't plan it. Planning was a luxury for men who still believed in tomorrow. Samuel had stopped believing 3 years ago, the day they sold his daughter south to the sugar fields of Louisiana. Her name was Grace. She was 7 years old. He never saw her again. The overseer's whip had found his back that evening for moving too slow through the cotton rows. 20 lashes. Samuel counted each one, let the pain carve itself into memory alongside all the other scars. But when the overseer turned away, laughing with another white man about a runaway they'd caught and hanged that morning, something inside Samuel finally broke loose. Not his body, his fear. He waited until the moon rose full and pale over the Whitmore plantation in southern Georgia, its light turning the cotton fields into a sea of ghostly white. The main house stood 300 yards away, all candle-lit windows and false elegance built on bones and blood. Samuel had picked every brick of its foundation, had planted every flower in its garden, had served dinner to men who discussed his worth in the same breath they praised the tenderness of roasted duck. The chains on his ankles were old iron, rusted but strong. He'd been wearing them for 2 months, punishment for looking a white woman in the eye when she asked him a direct question. The logic of it had stopped mattering long ago. In the quarters, the other enslaved people pretended to sleep. They always did when someone was planning something. Better not to know, better not to see. Margaret, who'd been like a mother to him since his own died of fever, pressed a small cloth bundle into his hands as he passed her door. Cornbread. A piece of salted pork. She said nothing, just touched his face once and turned away. Tell me in the comments which country you are from and what you thought of this story. And if this story made an impression on you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future stories. Samuel moved through the darkness like smoke, keeping to the shadows of the tobacco barns and equipment sheds. Dogs would come soon, they always did. But he had maybe an hour before anyone noticed the broken lock on his cabin door. The forest began where the plantation ended, a sudden wall of darkness that swallowed the moonlight. Pine and oak and something older, something that seemed to breathe. Samuel had heard the stories, all enslaved people had, about the territories west of the Mississippi where the Cherokee had been forced to resettle after the Trail of Tears, about villages in those territories that welcomed runaways, about alliances between the displaced and the escaped. The white men called it savage country. They said the Indians would scalp you as soon as look at you, that they were heathens and demons. But Samuel had also heard whispers from an old man named Josiah, who'd tried to run 10 years back and been caught in Alabama. Before they brought him back, Josiah swore he'd seen Cherokee warriors standing in a river, watching the slave catchers hunt, doing nothing to help the white men, just watching, waiting. When the dogs got close, Josiah said one of the warriors had pointed west and spoken a single word in English. Run, Samuel ran. The forest swallowed him whole. Branches tore at his face and arms. The chains on his ankles sang with every step, a rhythm that felt like prayer and panic combined. Behind him, distant and terrible, he heard the first shouts from the plantation, then the dogs. He ran harder. The forest floor was thick with pine needles and rotting leaves, soft enough to muffle his footsteps, but treacherous in the darkness. Twice he fell, landing hard on roots that felt like bones beneath the earth. The chains bit into his ankles, drawing blood that left a trail he knew the dogs would follow. Samuel splashed through a narrow creek, then doubled back and ran upstream, an old trick that might buy him minutes. The water was ice cold, October in Georgia, and his breath came in ragged clouds. His lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he didn't stop. By dawn, he'd put maybe 10 miles between himself and Whitmore Plantation. Not enough. Never enough. The dogs would track him. The slave catchers would come, they always did. Running was just dying slower. That's when he found the others. They were huddled in a hollow beneath a fallen oak, 4 people who looked as desperate and terrified as Samuel felt. 3 men and 1 woman, all of them carrying the same haunted look in their eyes, the look of people who'd chosen death over chains. The woman saw him first. She had short-cropped hair and a scar that ran from her temple to her jaw, pale against her dark skin. Her hand moved to a sharpened stick she'd fashioned into a crude weapon. "Easy," Samuel said, raising his hands. "I'm running too." One of the men, young, maybe 20, with his shirt torn and bloody, nodded toward Samuel's ankles. "Those chains gonna bring the dogs right to us." "I know," Samuel said. "You got tools to break them. If we had tools, you think we'd be hiding in a hole?" The speaker was older, maybe 50, with grey threading through his hair, and a voice like gravel. "Name's Moses. This here is Ruth." He gestured to the woman. "That's Daniel and Thomas." The 2 other men nodded, brothers by the look of them, both lean and hard from field work. "Samuel." "Where you heading, Samuel?" Moses asked. "West. Heard about Cherokee territories. Heard they take people in." Moses studied him for a long moment. "Heard the same. Also heard most runaways die before they get there. It's 400 miles through slave states, then Indian territory, patrols everywhere. Militias, catchers with dogs and guns. Then I'll die west," Samuel said simply, "but I won't die in chains." Ruth smiled at that, a quick, fierce expression. "Good. We need more crazy. Crazy might get us there." They moved out within the hour, keeping to the thickest parts of the forest, following deer trails and creek beds. Moses had escaped 3 days earlier from a plantation in southern Alabama. Ruth had run 2 weeks ago from a cotton farm outside Mobile. The brothers, Daniel and Thomas, had been sold away from their mother just days before and decided to burn the transport wagon and run while the white men were sleeping off whiskey. None of them knew exactly where they were going. Just west, always west. The days blurred together. They traveled by night, slept in ditches and caves during the day. They ate what they could find, wild berries, roots, a rabbit Thomas managed to trap. Once they stole eggs from a farm, while the white family was at church. The whole time, Samuel felt the presence of the dogs behind them, getting closer. On the 5th night, the forest changed. It was subtle at first. The trees grew taller, older, their trunks thick as houses. The air smelled different, cleaner somehow, like rain and cedar. The sounds changed too. No more distant dogs, no more shouts from patrols, just silence. And then, as they crested a small ridge, Samuel saw the fires. At first, he thought they were campfires from a patrol, but there were too many, spread out in a wide circle at the bottom of a shallow valley. Not a camp, a village. "Cherokee," Ruth whispered. They watched from the tree line as figures moved between the fires. Men, women, children, but not just Cherokee. Samuel's heart seized in his chest. There were black people down there too, walking freely, talking, laughing. "Is this real?" Daniel breathed. Moses was crying silently, tears tracking down his weathered face. "It's Fire River, it has to be." They descended slowly, hands raised, ready to run or fight or beg. But as they emerged from the trees, the people in the village simply stopped and watched. No one raised a weapon, no one shouted. A tall Cherokee man with grey braids and a face carved from stone approached them. He looked at their torn clothes, their bleeding feet, the chains still on Samuel's ankles. Then he spoke in careful English. "You are safe here. No one will take you back." Samuel's knees buckled. Ruth caught him. Somewhere in the village, someone began to drum, a slow, steady rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. The Cherokee man gestured toward the fires. "Come, eat, rest. You are home now." And Samuel, who hadn't cried since the day they took Grace, finally wept. Fire River wasn't on any map. That was by design. The village sat in a hidden valley where 3 rivers converged, surrounded by hills thick with pine and oak. You couldn't see it from any ridge or trail. You had to know it was there, and the only people who knew were the ones the village wanted to find it. Runaways with nowhere else to go, and Cherokee who'd been displaced by the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Samuel learned the history in pieces over his first week there, told in fragments by different people around different fires. The Cherokee of Fire River were part of a larger band that had been forced west on the Trail of Tears 14 years earlier. Thousands had died on that march, from cold, from disease, from heartbreak. The ones who survived settled in Indian Territory, land the government had promised them west of Arkansas. But even there, white settlers kept pushing in, and the government kept redrawing boundaries. A group of warriors, disgusted with treaties that meant nothing and promises that dissolved like morning mist, had broken away. Led by a man named Running Wolf, they'd traveled deeper into the untamed territories and founded Fire River in a place so remote that even the U.S. Army couldn't be bothered to look for it. But Running Wolf had done something radical, something that terrified white plantation owners more than any rebellion. He'd opened Fire River's doors to escaped slaves. The logic was simple, Running Wolf explained to Samuel one evening. Both Cherokee and enslaved Africans had been displaced, brutalized, treated as less than human by the same white men. Both had seen their families torn apart, their cultures suppressed, their very existence criminalized. Why shouldn't they stand together? The white man fears nothing more than unity among those he has wronged, Running Wolf said. He was sitting across the fire from Samuel, his weathered face illuminated by flames. He was perhaps 60 years old, with hair that fell past his shoulders, streaked with silver, alone. We are hunted. Together. We are dangerous. Samuel was still processing it all. The village held maybe 200 people, roughly half Cherokee, half formerly enslaved. Children of both groups played together in the common areas. Families shared meals. Everyone worked. Hunting, farming, building, defending. And everyone was free. Ruth adapted faster than Samuel. Within 3 days, she was helping the Cherokee women tan hides and learning their language. Moses spent his time with the elders, listening to stories and sharing his own. Daniel and Thomas joined the young warriors on hunting parties. Samuel found himself drawn to the forge. A Cherokee blacksmith named Stone Hand worked there, crafting tools and weapons. He was a quiet man, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from an old accident, but his work was precise and beautiful. When he saw Samuel watching, he simply handed him a hammer and pointed to a horseshoe that needed reshaping. They worked in silence for hours. Samuel had smithed a little on the plantation, enough to fix tools and shoe horses, but this was different. This was crafting for his own people, for freedom. On his 6th day in Fire River, Stone Hand finally broke the anvil and spoke, "The chains on your ankles, you want them off?" Samuel looked down. He'd almost forgotten about them, the iron cutting into skin that had grown infected. "Yes." Stone Hand nodded toward the anvil. "Put your foot up." It took 20 minutes of careful work with hammer and chisel. When the second shackle fell away, Samuel felt lighter than air. He picked up the chains, feeling their weight, all the miles they'd held him. "What should I do with them?" he asked. Stone Hand smiled, the first smile Samuel had seen from him. "We melt them down, make plowshares or knives, something useful." "Knives," Samuel said, "in case the slave catchers come." "They will come," Stone Hand said matter-of-factly. "They always do, but they do not leave." That night, there was a council meeting in the center of the village. Everyone attended, Cherokee and black, old and young. Running Wolf spoke first, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "A messenger came today from the Creek settlement to the south. They have heard rumors. White militias are organizing in Georgia and Alabama. They know escaped slaves are disappearing into the territories. They are planning raids." A murmur ran through the crowd. Samuel felt Ruth tense beside him. Running Wolf raised his hand for silence. "We have faced this before. Fire River has stood for 12 years because we are careful, because we are strong, and because we fight when we must. But I want everyone to understand, the danger is growing. The plantation owners are losing slaves, they are losing money, they are losing control, and they are afraid. "Good!" someone called out. Others laughed, but it was nervous laughter. Running Wolf didn't smile. Fear makes men cruel and desperate. We must be ready. He gestured to a Cherokee warrior named Swift Arrow, who stood and unrolled a hide map. It showed the surrounding territories, with markings for patrol routes, settlements, and safe paths. "We've placed scouts along all approaches to the valley," Swift Arrow explained. 3 days warning minimum if any force moves toward us. We have supply caches hidden in the hills, escape routes marked. If we must scatter, we can. If we must fight, we will. "And if they find Fire River?" an older black woman asked. Her name was Hannah, and she'd arrived just 2 months before, half dead from exposure. Running Wolf met her eyes. "Then we burn it, and we rebuild somewhere else. What matters is not the place. It is the people, it is the idea. As long as we stand together, Fire River exists." The meeting continued for another hour, discussing defenses, supplies, and contingency plans. Samuel listened, feeling something unfamiliar growing in his chest. Hope, not the desperate, fragile hope of a runaway praying he wouldn't be caught, but something stronger, harder. The hope of a man who belonged somewhere, who had people willing to fight beside him. After the meeting, Moses found Samuel at the forge. The old man looked troubled. "You thinking about Grace?" Moses asked quietly. Samuel nodded. He thought about her every day, wondered if she was alive, if she was being treated well, if she even remembered him. "I tried to find her," Samuel said, "before I ran. Asked everyone I could. No one knew which plantation she'd been sold to, just somewhere in Louisiana." Moses was quiet for a moment. Then, "There are people here who know the roads, who know the plantations, who've been rescuing people for years." Samuel looked up sharply. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Fire River doesn't just take in runaways. Sometimes they go out and bring people back." Moses gripped Samuel's shoulder. "You're not ready yet. You need to heal, get strong, learn to fight. But when you are ready, maybe we can find out where she is." Samuel felt tears burning in his eyes. "You mean that?" "We're free now, Samuel. That means something. Means we don't just survive. We fight back. We help each other. We find the ones we lost." Moses smiled, his weathered face creasing. "That's what Fire River really is. Not just a place to hide, a place to become dangerous." That night Samuel couldn't sleep. He walked through the village, watching the dying fires, listening to the sounds of children dreaming and adults keeping watch. Somewhere in the darkness, drums beat softly, Cherokee rhythms mixed with African patterns, a new music born from shared survival. He thought about Grace, about finding her, about bringing her here, to this impossible place where Black and Cherokee children played together under stars that belonged to no master. He thought about the chains Stonehand had removed from his ankles, now melting in the forge, becoming something new. And he thought about the slave catchers who would inevitably come, hunting for runaways, expecting fear and submission. They would find neither. Samuel returned to the forge and picked up the hammer Stonehand had given him. It felt good in his hand, solid, real. Tomorrow he would ask Swift Arrow to teach him to fight. Tomorrow he would begin learning Cherokee. Tomorrow he would start becoming the kind of man who could walk back into the South, into the heart of slavery itself, and bring his daughter home. But tonight he simply stood in Fire River and breathed free air. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The first slave catchers arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October. Samuel was working at the forge with Stonehand when the warning came. A distant horn blast from the eastern ridge, 3 short notes repeated twice. The signal for approaching danger. Within minutes, the village transformed. Children were gathered into the central longhouse. Warriors armed themselves with rifles, bows, and knives. The elderly and injured moved to pre-designated hiding spots in the caves above the village. Everyone moved with practiced efficiency, no panic, just grim determination. Samuel grabbed the knife Stone Hand had finished forging 2 days earlier. It was simple but deadly sharp, balanced for throwing. His hands were shaking. "First time?" Swift Arrow appeared beside him, already armed with a rifle and a quiver of arrows. "First time defending," Samuel said. "Ran plenty. Never fought back." Swift Arrow nodded, his face painted with ash and red clay in the Cherokee warrior tradition. He was perhaps 30, lean and hard, with eyes that missed nothing. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd been teaching Samuel and the other newcomers how to fight, hand-to-hand combat, knife work, basic archery. Samuel wasn't good yet, but he was learning. "Today you learn the most important lesson," Swift Arrow said. "White men hunt us because they think we are prey. We teach them different." Running Wolf gathered the warriors at the northern entrance to the valley, about 40 fighters total, both Cherokee and black, men and women. Ruth was among them, holding a bow she'd become surprisingly proficient with. Moses had insisted he could still fight despite his age, and carried a heavy wooden club studded with iron nails. "Scouts report 5 riders," Running Wolf said, "professional slave catchers by their equipment. Dogs, rifles. They're following tracks from runaways who passed through 3 days ago." He looked at Daniel and Thomas, who'd helped guide another group of escaped slaves into Fire River just that week. The brothers nodded grimly. "They don't know Fire River exists yet," Running Wolf continued. "They're just following a trail. If we're smart, we send them away with nothing. If we're lucky, they turn back. If we're unlucky—" He didn't finish the sentence. Everyone understood. Swift Arrow spoke up. "We let them enter the valley approach, surround them, give them one chance to leave. If they refuse—" He drew his finger across his throat. "No unnecessary killing," Running Wolf said firmly. "We are not murderers, but we protect our own. Remember that." They moved into position with the silence of smoke. Samuel found himself crouched in underbrush on the eastern slope, 30 feet above the valley approach. Ruth was 20 yards to his left. Swift Arrow was directly across from him on the opposite slope. Others were scattered throughout the trees, invisible unless you knew where to look. They waited. The sun climbed higher. Samuel's legs cramped. A horsefly landed on his neck, but he didn't move to swat it away. Below, the narrow trail leading to the valley entrance remained empty. Then he heard them. Dogs first, deep-throated baying that made Samuel's stomach clench with remembered fear. How many times had he heard that sound in nightmares? How many runaways had died because of those dogs? The riders appeared around a bend in the trail. 5 white men, exactly as reported. They wore the rough clothes of frontiersmen, but their equipment was expensive. Good rifles, leather saddles, steel chains hanging from their saddle horns. Professional slave catchers, men who made their living hunting human beings. The lead rider was a massive man with a thick beard and small, cruel eyes. He held the leads to 3 bloodhounds that strained forward, noses to the ground, following the scent trail that led directly toward Fire River. "Trail's fresh," the lead man called to the others. His voice was rough, tinged with the accent of the Deep South. "Can't be more than a few days ahead, probably holed up somewhere close." Another rider, younger, scanned the surrounding hills nervously. "This is getting mighty far from civilized territory, Clemens. Maybe we should—" "Shut up, Curtis. There's $500 on them runaways, each. That's $2,500 for 5 darkies. We're not turning back now." Samuel felt rage building in his chest, hot and sharp. $500. That's what he'd been worth, what Grace was worth. Numbers on a page, property. The riders moved deeper into the valley approach. The trail narrowed here with steep slopes on either side, perfect ambush territory. When they were exactly where Running Wolf wanted them, he stood up. just stood, rising from concealment 30 feet ahead of the riders. He held no weapon, just raised one hand in a gesture that could have been greeting or warning. The lead rider, Clemens, yanked his horse to a stop. The other riders clustered behind him, hands moving to their rifles. "What the hell?" Clemens growled. Then louder, "You speak English, Chief? This is white business. We're tracking runaway property. You seen any slaves pass through here?" Running Wolf's face might have been carved from stone. "You are not welcome here. Turn back." Clemens laughed, a sound like rocks grinding. "Not welcome. This here is Indian territory, granted. But the federal government has agreements. We got legal right to pursue runaway property anywhere they run. Indian lands included. Says so right in the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. "Your laws do not apply here," Running Wolf said simply. "Listen, Chief," Clemens began. "I am not a chief. I am Running Wolf, and this is Fire River. You have one chance. Leave now. Forget you were here, or you do not leave at all." For the first time, Clemens seemed to notice the unnatural silence of the forest around them. His eyes swept the slopes, seeing nothing but sensing everything. The dogs whined nervously, pulling against their leads. "Boys," Clemens said quietly to his companions, "I think we got a situation here." Curtis, the younger rider, had gone pale. "Clemens, maybe we should—" "We're not leaving without them slaves," Clemens said flatly. He raised his voice again. "You hiding runaways here, you're breaking federal law. That makes you criminals. You hand them over right now, or we come back with the militia." Running Wolf sighed, as if deeply tired. Then he whistled, a sharp, clear note. 40 warriors rose from concealment simultaneously, surrounding the riders completely. Every rifle, every bow, every weapon was trained on the 5 white men. Samuel stood with the others, his knife in hand, and watched the color drain from Clemens' face. "Lord above," Curtis whispered. "Clemens, there's dozens of them." "I see 'em," Clemens growled, but his hand was shaking on his rifle. Running Wolf spoke again, his voice carrying clearly. "This is Fire River. We are Cherokee. We are free blacks. We are families. You will not find runaway property here. You will find free people, living in peace, harming no one. Now leave. Do not come back, and tell your friends. Tell the militias, tell the plantation owners, Fire River is protected. Any who come hunting will not return." For a long moment, nobody moved. Samuel could feel the tension vibrating in the air like a plucked string. One wrong move, one nervous trigger finger, and this would become a bloodbath. Clemens was calculating, his small eyes darting between the surrounding warriors. 5 men against 40. The math wasn't complicated. "This ain't over," he finally said. "You're harboring fugitives. That's a federal crime. We'll be back with proper authority." "No," Running Wolf said quietly. "You will not." Swift Arrow's arrow took Clemens in the shoulder before anyone could react. The big man screamed and tumbled from his saddle. Instantly, the other riders threw up their hands. "Don't shoot, don't shoot, we're leaving," Curtis was shouting, his voice cracking with terror. Swift Arrow had another arrow knocked in less than a second, trained on Curtis's chest. "The wounded one stays. The rest of you go. Tell them what you saw. Tell them what happens to slave catchers who come to Fire River. Tell them we do not fear them. Now go." The 4 remaining riders didn't hesitate. They wheeled their horses and bolted back down the trail, leaving Clemens bleeding in the dirt and the 3 dogs tangled in their leads. The sound of hooves faded quickly. Warriors descended from the slopes surrounding Clemens. The big man clutched his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers, his face twisted with pain and fury. You shot me! You goddamn savage!" Stonehand walked up and calmly untangled the bloodhounds from their leads. The dogs, freed, immediately bolted after the departed riders. Stonehand watched them go with a slight smile. "Arrow missed anything vital," he observed. "He will live." Running Wolf knelt beside Clemens. "Listen carefully. We could kill you. We have cause, but we want you alive. Want you to carry a message. Tell the plantation owners. Tell the slave catchers. Tell the militias. Fire River exists. It is real, and it is protected. Any who come hunting will face what you faced, or worse. They'll come anyway, Clemens spat. You've just declared war, you understand that? The army will come. They'll burn this place to ashes. Let them try, Running Wolf said softly. Now you walk out. Follow your friends. If you're still in Cherokee lands by tomorrow, we'll find your body and leave it for the crows. Two warriors hauled Clemens to his feet. He stumbled, clutching his bleeding shoulder, then began limping down the trail. They watched him until he disappeared around the bend. Samuel realized he'd been holding his breath. He let it out slowly. Ruth appeared beside him. That was terrifying. That was necessary, Moses said from Samuel's other side. Now they know. Fire River isn't just a rumor. It's real, and it fights back. But Samuel saw the concern on Running Wolf's face as the elder returned to the village. The message had been sent. But messages worked both ways. Now the white men knew where to find them. That night, the council met again. The mood was tense. Everyone understood what had happened. They'd crossed a line. We should move, one of the Cherokee warriors said. Find a new location before they come back with the army. No, Running Wolf said firmly. We've run enough, all of us. Cherokee run from Georgia. Black run from plantations, run from the Trail of Tears, run from chains. Fire River was supposed to be the place we stop running. Then we prepare for war, Swift Arrow said. Because they will come. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not next week, but they will come. Samuel stood up, surprising himself. All eyes turned to him. His heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. Then we don't just prepare for war. We prepare for survival. We find more places like this, create more fire rivers, build a network, help more people escape, make it so they can't destroy us because we're everywhere. He looked around the council. They fear us because we prove their lies wrong, prove that Black and Cherokee can stand together, prove that freedom is possible. So we spread that fear. We become the nightmare that keeps slave catchers awake at night. Silence. Then Running Wolf smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. The smith speaks wisdom. Yes, we do not wait for them to come to us. We take the fight to them, not with violence alone, but with liberation. Every slave we free is a theft from their wealth. Every alliance we build is a threat to their control. The council debated late into the night. Plans were made. Scouts would be sent to find other sympathetic Cherokee bands. Safe houses would be established along escape routes. The Underground Railroad had been operating in the north. Now Fire River would become its western terminus. When Samuel finally returned to his cabin, a small but sturdy structure he'd helped build, he found Ruth sitting outside, cleaning her bow by firelight. "Big speech tonight," she said. Samuel sat beside her. Felt like something needed saying. Grace would be proud. He looked at her sharply. Ruth rarely mentioned his daughter. She knew how much it hurt. "Moses told me," Ruth said quietly, "about the plan to find her. I want to help." "It's dangerous." "Everything's dangerous," Ruth interrupted. "Running was dangerous. Living here is dangerous. But we're free now, Samuel. That means we get to choose our dangers. And I choose to help you find your daughter." Samuel felt emotion tightening his throat. "Why?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. "I had a son. Before. Master sold him when he was 5. Never knew where he went. Never got to look for him. Died wondering if he was alive, if he remembered me, if he was safe." She met Samuel's eyes, and in the firelight he saw tears tracking down her scarred face. "So, I can't find my boy. But maybe I can help you find your girl. Maybe that's enough." Samuel reached out and gripped her hand. They sat in silence, two broken people holding on to hope in a village that shouldn't exist. Tomorrow they would train harder, build stronger defenses, prepare for the war that was coming. But tonight they simply sat together and remembered the ones they'd lost and dreamed of the ones they might save. In the distance, drums echoed through the valley, the heartbeat of Fire River, the sound of freedom, defiant and unafraid. 3 weeks after the incident with Clemens, a young black man stumbled into Fire River at dawn, more dead than alive. His name was Isaac. He was 19 years old. He'd been running for 8 days through the wilderness of Arkansas, pursued by the same slave catchers who'd killed his 2 companions when they tried to escape together. Isaac had watched them die, shot in the back, left in a ditch, and kept running because stopping meant joining them. Samuel was among the first to reach him when he collapsed at the village perimeter. Isaac was burning with fever, his feet bloody and torn, his body covered in scratches from forcing his way through miles of thorny underbrush. But his eyes were alert, desperate. "They're coming!" Isaac gasped as Samuel and Stonehand carried him toward the healing lodge. "Army, militia, maybe 50 men, 3 days behind me. They know about this place. They know." The village erupted into controlled chaos. Running Wolf immediately called an emergency council. Scouts were dispatched to confirm Isaac's report. Women began packing essential supplies. Warriors checked weapons and ammunition. Samuel sat with Isaac while the village healer, a Cherokee woman named Willow, tended his wounds. The young man was rambling with fever, speaking in fragments. Heard them talking. Plantation owner from Georgia offered $5,000, destroy the Indian stronghold, make an example. Government backing? Rest, Samuel said, wiping Isaac's forehead with a cool cloth. You're safe now. No one's safe, Isaac muttered. That's what Clemens said, the one they sent back. Said he'd gather an army, burn Fire River, kill everyone. Said it was about principle now. Can't let slaves and Indians think they can stand up to white authority. By noon, the scouts confirmed it. A force of approximately 60 armed men, a mixture of federal militia, slave catchers and local volunteers, was moving through the territories, heading directly for Fire River. They'd be here in 3 days, maybe less. The council met in the central longhouse. The debate was fierce. We scatter, one elder proposed, disappear into the wilderness, reform elsewhere. And go where? Moses challenged. How many times can we run? How many fire rivers can we build before they hunt us down? They know we exist now. They'll never stop looking. Then we fight, Swift Arrow said flatly. 60 against our 40 warriors. Not good odds, but we have the terrain advantage. We know this valley, they don't. Fight and die, another voice called out. We have children here, elders. Do we sacrifice them for pride? Running Wolf raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of leadership. Both positions have merit, which is why we do both. We send the children, the elders, the pregnant women, anyone who cannot fight, into the deep wilderness. Swift Arrow will lead them to the hidden canyon we prepared for this. They leave tonight. He turned to the warriors. The rest of us prepare defensive positions, not to win a direct battle. We cannot. But to buy time, to make them pay for every inch, and to send them a message so terrifying that they think twice before coming again. What message? Samuel asked. Running Wolf's smile was cold. That Fire River does not burn alone. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Samuel worked alongside everyone else, digging defensive trenches, setting up barriers, creating fallback positions throughout the valley. Stonehand showed him and others how to create improvised explosives using black powder from their limited ammunition stores, not powerful enough to kill, but enough to create noise, confusion, fear. The children left that first night, along with about 40 non-combatants. Samuel watched them go, carrying everything they could, disappearing into the darkness led by Swift Arrow and 10 warriors. The village felt hollow without them. Ruth was staying. So was Moses, despite Samuel's arguments. So were 32 other defenders, Cherokee and black, men and women ranging from 18 to 60 years old. They were armed with a mixture of rifles, bows, spears, knives, and pure determination. We don't have to win, Running Wolf reminded them on the second day. We just have to survive. Make them bleed, make them afraid, then slip away in the night and rejoin our families. Fire River as a place may fall, but Fire River as an idea will live on. On the afternoon of the third day, the scouts reported the militia had entered the valley approach. This time, there was no ambush, no dramatic confrontation. The defenders simply watched from concealment as 60 armed men rode into view, spread out in a formation that suggested military training. They had 2 cannon, small field pieces, but devastating if used properly. At their head rode Clemens, his arm in a sling, but his face set with grim purpose. Beside him was a man in a formal militia captain's uniform, and behind them came dozens of others. Some in uniform, some in civilian clothes, all heavily armed. They stopped at the valley entrance, right where Running Wolf had confronted Clemens weeks before. The militia captain, a lean man with a carefully groomed moustache, stood in his stirrups and called out in a voice trained for battlefield commands. By the authority of the United States federal government and the territory of Arkansas, I hereby declare this settlement illegal. You are harboring fugitive slaves in violation of federal law. You have attacked lawful slave catchers in pursuit of their legal property. You have exactly 1 hour to surrender all escaped slaves and any weapons. Failure to comply will result in the use of lethal force. Silence from the hidden village. The militia waited. Birds sang in the trees, unaware of the coming violence. After 5 minutes, the captain nodded to his artillery crew. They positioned one of the small cannon and fired a warning shot, a ball that screamed over the valley and smashed into a tree 50 yards beyond the village center, splintering the trunk. "That was a warning!" the captain shouted. "Next shot goes into your village. Surrender or we advance." Running Wolf stood up. He was alone, holding no weapon, standing on a rise where everyone could see him. Samuel's heart clenched. This wasn't the plan. They were supposed to stay hidden, use guerrilla tactics, not expose themselves. But Running Wolf knew what he was doing. "I am Running Wolf," he called out, his voice carrying across the valley. "This is Cherokee land, given to us by your government after you forced us from our homes in Georgia. You have no authority here." "You harbor fugitive slaves," Clemens shouted, pushing forward. "That gives us authority anywhere." "We harbor free people," Running Wolf corrected. "They came to us. We gave them sanctuary. That is our right under our own laws." The captain's face hardened. "This is your final warning. Surrender the fugitives or what?" Running Wolf interrupted. "You'll kill us? Burn our village? You think you're the first? We are Cherokee. We survived your removal. We survived the Trail of Tears. We survived winters that killed thousands. You think 60 men with guns frighten us?" He gestured broadly. "But you should be frightened, because you're not fighting runaways anymore, not fighting savages. You're fighting an idea, the idea that people deserve freedom, the idea that different peoples can stand together against oppression. Kill us today, and tomorrow that idea spreads. More fire rivers will appear, more alliances will form. You can't shoot an idea, Captain." For a moment, Samuel thought Running Wolf's words might actually work. He saw uncertainty on some of the militia members' faces, saw men shifting uncomfortably in their saddles. Then Clemens spat and raised his rifle. "Enough talk!" The shot cracked across the valley. Running Wolf jerked backward, blood blooming across his chest, and fell. For one eternal second, everything stopped. Then chaos erupted. The defenders opened fire from concealment. Arrows and bullets flew into the militia formation. Men screamed. Horses reared. The militia scattered, taking cover, returning fire wildly. Samuel was shooting before he consciously decided to, the rifle in his hands bucking, the smell of powder smoke burning his nostrils. Beside him, Ruth fired methodically, each arrow finding a target. Moses swung his club, shouting defiance. The battle dissolved into fragments, moments of clarity in a storm of violence. A militiaman charging the tree line, cut down by crossfire, one of the cannons firing, the shot tearing through a defensive barrier. Stone Hand fighting hand to hand with two men, his hammer crushing bone. Ruth taking an arrow in the leg, still fighting. Moses going down, blood spreading across his shirt. Time lost meaning. Samuel fired until his rifle was empty, switched to his knife, fought like a cornered animal. Around him, defenders and militia members died. The valley filled with smoke and screams and the metallic smell of blood. Then he was running, they were all running, falling back to the second defensive line as planned. The militia was advancing, having realized they outnumbered the defenders significantly. But every yard cost them, every push met resistance. As darkness fell, Samuel found himself in a small cave on the valley's western slope with 8 other survivors. Ruth, limping, Stone Hand, covered in blood, none of it his, 2 Cherokee warriors, and 3 other black defenders. Below, the village burned. The militia had torched everything. "Running Wolf?" Samuel gasped. "Dead," Stone Hand said flatly. "Died instantly. Moses, too. And 17 others. We lost 20 today." Samuel felt the grief hit him like a physical blow. Moses, who'd been like a father, Running Wolf, who'd welcomed him, 20 people who'd been alive this morning. "What now?" one of the Cherokee warriors asked. Stone Hand looked out at the burning village. "Now we ghost. Make them think we're still here. Pick them off one by one tonight. By dawn, we're gone. Meet Swift Arrow at the hidden canyon. Regroup." "And then," Ruth asked quietly. "Then we build another fire river," Stone Hand said. "And another. And another. Until there are so many they can't burn them all." Through the night, the survivors became shadows. They used every trick Running Wolf had taught them: silent movement, misdirection, sudden violence from darkness. By morning, the militia had lost 12 more men to arrows from nowhere, knives in the dark, traps in the forest. When the sun rose, the defenders were gone. The militia searched Fire River's ruins and found nothing but bodies and ash. But they found something else too. Painted on a burned wall in what looked like blood were words in English and Cherokee: "Fire River lives. Freedom cannot be burned." Samuel didn't see that message until weeks later, when Swift Arrow described it. By then, they'd reunited with the survivors and refugees at the hidden canyon. 20 warriors dead, but 160 people alive, children safe, the elders survived. And the story of Fire River's stand was already spreading, whispered by escaped slaves, carried by sympathetic Cherokee, even grudgingly respected by some militia members who'd fought there. The place was gone, but the idea remained. Samuel spent weeks in grief and rage, mourning Moses and Running Wolf and all the others, but slowly, purpose crystallized. One night, he found Stone Hand and Ruth at the canyon's edge, looking east toward the territories they'd fled. "I'm going to find Grace," Samuel said. "I'm ready now." Stone Hand nodded slowly. "Louisiana, sugar plantations, dangerous." "Everything's dangerous," Samuel echoed Ruth's earlier words. "But I'm not running anymore. I'm taking the fight to them." Ruth stood, testing her healing leg. "Then we go together. 3 people can move faster than one." "This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," Ruth said fiercely. "It's all our fight. That's what Fire River taught us. We're not individuals anymore. We're family. You want to find Grace? We'll help, and then we'll find the next person and the next, until the plantations are empty and the masters are afraid to sleep at night." Stone Hand smiled grimly. "The new Fire River is not a place. It is us. Wherever we go, we carry it. Whoever we free, we spread it." Samuel looked at his companions. This scarred woman and quiet blacksmith who'd become his family. Beyond them, in the hidden canyon, 160 people were building new shelters, planning new refuges, preparing for a long war. Fire River had fallen. But from its ashes, something more dangerous was rising. Not a sanctuary, an insurgency. and Samuel was about to become its blade. The Louisiana sugar plantations were hell with a different name. Samuel understood this within an hour of crossing into Louisiana territory 2 months after Fire River's fall. Where cotton plantations were brutal, sugar plantations were murderous. The work was harder, the hours longer, the death rate higher. Enslaved people here lasted an average of 7 years before dying from exhaustion, accidents, or disease. If Grace was here, she might already be gone. The thought haunted Samuel as he, Ruth, and Stonehand moved through the swamps and forests of southern Louisiana, following information gathered from a network of contacts they'd built over the past 8 weeks. Fire River's survivors had spread across the territories, but they hadn't scattered. They'd organized. Small cells, safe houses, guides who knew every slave-trading route and patrol pattern. They'd learned that a girl matching Grace's description, 8 years old, bright, good with numbers, had been sold to a plantation called Belmont, owned by a Frenchman named Marcel Duchamp. Belmont grew sugar cane along the Mississippi River, used over 300 enslaved people, and had a reputation for cruelty that made other plantation owners uncomfortable. The plan was insane. Infiltrate Belmont during harvest season, locate Grace, and extract her during the chaos. Simple in concept, impossible in execution, but they'd prepared. Samuel and Stonehand had forged documents claiming to be free blacks hired for seasonal work, a common practice during harvest when labor demands exceeded the available enslaved workforce. Ruth, pretending to be Samuel's sister, would pose as a house slave being rented out to Belmont's kitchen staff. The forgeries were excellent. Stonehand had spent weeks perfecting the stamps and signatures, but papers alone wouldn't save them if anyone looked too closely. They approached Belmont on a grey November morning, the air thick with moisture and the smell of burning cane fields. Sugar harvest meant controlled burns to remove the leaves before cutting. The sky was perpetually hazed with smoke. Belmont's main house was a colonial mansion, white-painted and columned, surrounded by gardens that would have been beautiful if not for the knowledge of what funded them. Beyond the house stretched fields of sugarcane that went to the horizon, and beyond those, the processing buildings where the cane was crushed, boiled, and refined into sugar. Samuel's heart hammered as they presented their papers to the plantation overseer, a Louisiana Creole man named Baptiste, who looked at them with the same expression someone might use for livestock. "Seasonal workers," Baptiste said, reading the documents. His French accent was thick. "You're late. Harvest started 2 weeks ago." "Boat was delayed in Memphis," Samuel lied smoothly. They'd practiced this story 100 times. "Current was against us the whole way down." Baptiste studied them for a long moment. Samuel forced himself to meet the man's eyes. Not challenging, but not submissive either. Free blacks had to walk a careful line. Finally, Baptiste nodded. "Pay is $2 per week. You sleep in the workers' quarters, east side. Work starts at dawn, ends at dark. You slack, you leave, understand?" "Yes, sir." "And the woman?" Baptiste looked at Ruth. "My sister," Samuel said. "Hired for kitchen work, papers there too." Baptiste examined Ruth's forged documents. Ruth kept her eyes down, playing the role of a submissive hired servant. After a moment, Baptiste handed the papers back. "Kitchen's short-staffed. Madame Duchamp will be pleased. Take her to the main house. You two report to the south fields. We're cutting today." They separated. Samuel watched Ruth walk toward the main house, every instinct screaming at him to stay close, to protect her. But this was the plan. Ruth in the house could gather information about Grace, whether she was still here, where she was assigned. Stonehand touched Samuel's arm. "She's strong. She'll be fine." They reported to the south fields and were immediately put to work. Sugarcane harvest was back-breaking labor, cutting the thick stalks with machetes, stripping leaves, hauling bundles to waiting wagons. The enslaved people working alongside them moved with the exhausted efficiency of those who knew there was no end to the work, only brief pauses before it resumed. Samuel worked in silence, his eyes constantly searching the fields for a small girl who might be his daughter. But the enslaved people here were almost all adults. Children too young to work, the fields would be assigned to lighter duties or kept in the quarters. By the time the sun set, Samuel's hands were bleeding and his back screamed, but he'd learned valuable information. During a water break, he'd managed to speak briefly with an older enslaved man named Jean-Paul, who'd been at Bellemont for 15 years. "You looking for someone?" Jean-Paul had said quietly, in French-accented English. It wasn't a question. Samuel hesitated, then nodded minimally. "Girl, about 8 years old." Samuel's heart seized. "Yes. There's a few. Duchamp likes to buy children. Says it's a better investment. You get more years of work." Jean-Paul's face was carefully neutral, but his eyes blazed with controlled rage. "Most of the children work in the house or the refinery, lighter work than the fields." "How do I find out which one?" "You don't," Jean-Paul interrupted. "Not safely. Too many questions get you whipped. Or worse, you want to find a specific child, you need someone with access to the house records." That night, Samuel met Ruth in a shadowed corner behind the workers' quarters. She looked exhausted but unharmed. "I'm in the kitchen," she reported quietly. "Madame Duchamp is exactly as terrible as you'd expect. But I talked to some of the house slaves. There are 6 children about Grace's age working various duties. One of them works in the refinery office, does counting and record-keeping." Samuel's breath caught. "Good with numbers, that's what I thought." Ruth gripped his hand. "I can't get access to the refinery without raising suspicion. It's where they keep the records, the money, the refined sugar ready for shipping, heavily supervised." "Then we need a distraction," Stonehand said. He'd appeared silently from the darkness, his blacksmith's instincts making him naturally stealthy. "Something big enough to pull attention away from the refinery." They planned through the night, speaking in whispers, knowing discovery meant death. 3 days later, during the evening processing shift when the refinery was running at full capacity, a fire broke out in one of the drying sheds on the eastern edge of the plantation. Not a serious fire. Stonehand had made sure of that. Just enough smoke and flame to pull the overseers and much of the workforce away from other areas. Just enough panic to create an opportunity. While everyone rushed to contain the blaze, Samuel slipped into the refinery building through a side door Ruth had left unlocked during her afternoon kitchen deliveries. The refinery was a massive wooden structure filled with boilers, vats, and processing equipment. The air was thick with steam and the cloying smell of boiling sugarcane juice. In a small office on the second floor, a girl sat at a desk, carefully recording numbers in a ledger. She was perhaps 8 years old, with her hair in 2 neat braids, wearing a simple dress that was cleaner than field clothes, but still marked her as enslaved. She looked up as Samuel entered. Her eyes widened, and Samuel stopped breathing. It was her, Grace, his daughter. 3 years older, thinner, but unmistakably his child. "Papa?" she whispered. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, feeling her small body shake with sobs. His own tears came unbidden, 3 years of grief and hope and fear finally releasing. "I found you," he whispered. "I found you, baby girl. I found you." "I thought you were dead," Grace sobbed. "They said you were dead. They said you'd been killed trying to run." "I made it. I'm free, and I'm taking you with me." But even as he said it, he heard voices outside, shouting footsteps. The fire was under control. People were returning to their duties. Grace pulled back, her young face streaked with tears but suddenly determined. "We can't go out the front. Too many overseers. But there's a loading door on the north side where they ship the refined sugar. It opens onto the river dock." "How do you know?" "I keep the shipping records," Grace said, with a hint of pride even in crisis. "I know when everything arrives and leaves. There's a boat due at dawn tomorrow to take sugar to New Orleans. If we can hide in the cargo..." Samuel's mind raced. Dawn was 8 hours away. They'd have to hide until then, avoid detection, and somehow get all three of them, plus Ruth and Stonehand, onto a cargo boat without being discovered. It was impossible, but so was everything else they'd done. "Show me the loading door," Samuel said. They spent the night hidden in the rafters of the refinery, breathing in sugar dust and steam, listening to workers and overseers below. Grace whispered stories about her 3 years at Bellamont. The cruelty, the occasional kindness, how she'd taught herself to read better by studying the ledgers, how she'd never stopped hoping Papa would come. Samuel told her about Fire River, about Ruth and Stonehand, about the family waiting in the hidden canyon, about a place where Black and Cherokee stood together, where children played freely, where no one wore chains. "Is it real?" Grace asked wonderingly. "It's real," Samuel promised. "And you're going to see it." Just before dawn, Ruth appeared at the loading door with Stonehand. She'd stolen kitchen knives and wrapped food supplies in cloth. Stonehand carried a heavy wooden club. "The boat's loading now," Ruth reported. "Sugar barrels, crew of 5, all Creole. They don't care much about Duchamp or his property. They just want their shipping fee. Then we make them an offer," Stonehand said. "Money or violence. Let them choose." They approached the dock as the last barrels were being loaded. The boat was a flat-bottomed river barge, designed for cargo rather than speed or comfort. The crew was exactly as Ruth described, working men who looked exhausted and underpaid. The captain was a lean man with a scarred face and suspicious eyes. He looked at the 4 of them, 2 black adults, 1 black child, and a Cherokee man, and his hand moved to the pistol at his belt. "Private boat," he said in French. "No passengers." "We're not asking to be passengers," Samuel said. He held out a small leather pouch that clinked with coins, everything they'd saved. "We're buying passage. $50 to take us to New Orleans, no questions asked." The captain's eyes widened. $50 was probably more than he made in 3 months. "That money's stolen." "Does it spend any different?" Stonehand asked quietly. A long pause. Around them the plantation was waking up. They could hear the morning bells ringing, overseers shouting, the daily machinery of slavery grinding to life. The captain looked at Grace, who was gripping Samuel's hand tightly. Something shifted in his expression. "Get in the cargo hold," he said finally. "Don't make noise. Don't show yourselves until we're well downriver. If anyone asks, I know nothing." They hid among the sugar barrels as the boat pushed away from the dock. As Bellamont receded into the distance, Samuel heard shouting from the plantation. Someone had discovered Grace missing. Workers were being questioned. A search was beginning, but they were already on the Mississippi, the current carrying them south toward New Orleans, toward freedom, toward the future. Grace fell asleep in Samuel's arms, exhausted and finally safe. Ruth and Stonehand kept watch, weapons ready in case the boat captain changed his mind. As dawn light painted the river gold, Samuel looked at his daughter's sleeping face and made a silent promise. She would never wear chains again. None of them would. Fire River had taught them that freedom wasn't a place. It was a choice, a commitment, a war fought one liberation at a time. They'd saved one child. Tomorrow they'd save another, and another, until the plantations were empty, and the slavers were the ones who couldn't sleep at night. The boat carried them south, and behind them, Bellamont Plantation descended into chaos, searching for property that was already free. 6 months after Grace's rescue, in the spring of 1845, 3 things happened that changed everything. First, a senator from Georgia gave a speech on the Senate floor declaring that the Indian-Negro Alliance in the Western Territories represented the greatest threat to Southern prosperity since Nat Turner's rebellion. He demanded federal military action to exterminate these strongholds of lawlessness and miscegenation. Second, a newspaper in New Orleans published an account by a riverboat captain who claimed he'd transported fugitive slaves. The story, embellished and sensationalized, described Fire River as a savage kingdom where hundreds of escaped slaves lived freely under Cherokee protection, defying all law and civilization. Third, Samuel's network freed 57 people in a single month. The new Fire River wasn't a single village anymore. It was a scattered network of safe houses, hidden camps, and sympathetic contacts stretching from Louisiana to the Indian Territories. Some were Cherokee settlements that had quietly adopted Fire River's philosophy. Others were isolated homesteads run by free blacks. A few were even Quaker farms whose owners risked everything to harbor runaways. Samuel, Ruth, Stonehand, and a growing number of others moved between these nodes, guiding people north and west, away from slavery and toward freedom. They'd become ghosts, appearing at plantations, liberating small groups, disappearing before militias could respond. The slave owners called them terrorists. The enslaved called them liberators. Grace traveled with them now. At 9 years old, she was the network's record keeper, maintaining coded lists of safe houses, patrol routes, and sympathetic contacts. Her memory was extraordinary, and her youth made her invisible. No one suspected a child of being part of a liberation network. On a warm April evening, they gathered at a remote cabin in Arkansas Territory for a rare meeting of the network's core members. 30 people crowded into the small structure and spilled into the surrounding woods. Cherokee warriors, escaped slaves, free blacks, even a few white abolitionists who'd risked everything to join the cause. Swift Arrow was there, scarred from half a dozen skirmishes but alive. Hannah, the elder who'd questioned Running Wolf about fighting back, had become one of their fiercest advocates. Jean-Paul from Belmont Plantation had escaped during the chaos of Grace's liberation, and now guided others along Louisiana escape routes. Stonehand stood before them, his quiet presence commanding attention. Over the past months he'd emerged as a reluctant leader, someone whose wisdom and strategic thinking made him the natural center of their scattered network. "We've had success," Stonehand began. 57 freed in 1 month, nearly 300 in the last 6 months. Fire River's legacy grows, but success brings attention. The Federals are mobilizing, militias are better organized, slave catchers are working together instead of competing. They're hunting us specifically now, not just random runaways. "Good," Ruth said from her place beside Samuel. "Let them hunt. Every man they send after us is a man not patrolling slave routes. Every resource they waste on us is a resource not controlling plantations." "There's more," Swift Arrow added. "Cherokee Nation leadership is under pressure from Washington. They're being told to expel any troublemakers, meaning anyone who helps fugitives. Some Cherokee settlements are being threatened with military action if they don't comply." "So they'll turn us in?" Hannah asked sharply. "Some might," Swift Arrow admitted, "but many won't. The memory of the Trail of Tears is still fresh. Cherokee know what it means to be displaced, to be hunted. Many would rather fight than betray those seeking freedom." Samuel had been quiet through most of the meeting, but now he stood. "I've been thinking about Running Wolf's last words, about Fire River being an idea, not a place. We've proven that's true. We're everywhere now, impossible to destroy, but maybe it's time we go further." "Further how?" Stonehand asked. "We don't just free people anymore," Samuel said. "We scare them. The plantation owners, the slave catchers, the politicians who profit from slavery. We make them afraid, not with random violence, with precision. We target the infrastructure of slavery itself." He gestured to Grace, who unrolled a large map she'd been carefully drawing over months. It showed the slave states with detailed notations, major plantation clusters, slave markets, transport routes, banks that financed slave purchases. "We hit them where it hurts," Samuel continued. "Not the people. We're not murderers, but the system. We burn auction houses, sabotage shipping that transports slaves, target the banks that profit from slave trading, make slavery expensive, make it dangerous, make it economically unviable. That's war," someone said. It's already war, Ruth countered. They declared it when they put the first chains on us, when they marched Cherokee out of Georgia at gunpoint, when they built their wealth on stolen labor and stolen land. We're just finally fighting back effectively. The debate raged for hours. Some argued Samuel's plan would bring overwhelming retaliation. Others insisted it was the only way forward. Eventually they voted. The decision was close, but clear. They would escalate. Over the next 3 months, slave markets in 3 cities suffered mysterious fires. A bank in Memphis that specialized in slave financing was robbed of $20,000, money that immediately funded more escape operations. Transport wagons carrying enslaved people to market were ambushed, their cargo liberated, their operators left tied up and humiliated but alive. The Southern press raged about Negro-Indian terrorism. State legislatures passed harsher laws. Militias formed specifically to hunt Fire River operatives, but enslaved people started believing freedom was possible. More people ran. More Cherokee settlements openly defied federal pressure to cooperate with slave catchers. The network grew. In July, Samuel and a small team infiltrated a slave auction in Nashville. They didn't disrupt the auction. Instead, they observed carefully, noting which families were being sold together, which children were being separated from parents. That night, they visited the slave pens and orchestrated a mass escape of 40 people, including an entire family of 6 that was scheduled to be split up and sold to different plantations the next day. But success made them overconfident. In August, while liberating people from a plantation in northern Mississippi, they were ambushed by a militia that had been tipped off. The fighting was vicious. 2 of their team members died. Samuel took a bullet in the shoulder. They escaped only because Ruth held off pursuers long enough for others to scatter, nearly dying in the process. They recovered at a safe house in Cherokee territory, tended by Willow, the healer from original Fire River who'd joined the network. As Samuel's shoulder healed, Grace sat beside him, reading aloud from newspapers they'd acquired. "Listen to this," she said. "It's from a senator. This criminal confederacy of savages and fugitives represents an existential threat to Southern civilization. They must be exterminated without mercy, their supporters punished, their sanctuaries destroyed. Only through absolute force can we restore order and protect the sacred institution of slavery." "Sacred," Samuel muttered bitterly. "But here's another one," Grace continued, her voice brightening. "From an abolitionist newspaper in Boston, reports from the frontier tell of an alliance between displaced Cherokee and escaped slaves that has captured the imagination of freedom-loving people everywhere. This Fire River, whether it exists as a single location or as a distributed network, represents hope that the moral cancer of slavery can be resisted. These brave souls deserve our support and admiration." Ruth, her arm in a sling from the Mississippi ambush, smiled grimly. "We're winning the narrative, at least in some places." "Narrative doesn't stop bullets," Stonehand said, but even he looked pleased. That evening, as they sat around a fire, Samuel told Grace stories about her mother, memories he'd kept locked away for years, finally able to share them now that he had his daughter back. He told her about Fire River, about Moses and Running Wolf, about the alliance that had given him hope when he'd had none. "Do you think we'll ever be able to stop running?" Grace asked quietly. "Ever just live somewhere without fear?" Samuel looked around the fire at Ruth, Stonehand, Swift Arrow, and the others who'd become his family. "Maybe not in our lifetime," he said honestly. "This is going to be a long fight. Slavery is too profitable, too entrenched. But every person we free, every child who grows up without chains, that's a victory, that's progress. And someday, maybe your children or grandchildren will live in a world where Fire River is just a story, a history lesson about when people stood up and said no more." "I'd like that," Grace said softly. 3 weeks later, federal troops attacked a Cherokee settlement suspected of harboring fugitives. They found none. Everyone had been evacuated hours earlier, warned by the network. But the message was clear. The government was done negotiating. The network responded by liberating an entire chain gang being transported through Arkansas. 30 enslaved people freed in broad daylight, their liberators vanishing into the woods before cavalry could respond. The war continued. Months became years. Samuel turned 40, then 45. Grace grew into a young woman, brilliant and fierce, eventually taking over much of the network's strategic planning. Ruth lost an eye in a skirmish, but kept fighting. Stonehand's hair went grey, but his hammer never wavered. They never captured all of them. The network was too dispersed, too adaptable. When one safe house was discovered, 3 more appeared. When militia members learned to recognize Fire River operatives, the network recruited new members the militia had never seen. Slavery didn't end because of Fire River. The Civil War did that years later. But historians would later argue that networks like Fire River helped create the conditions for war. They made slavery expensive, dangerous, and increasingly untenable. They proved that black and native peoples could organize effectively, resist systemically, and win tactical victories even against overwhelming force. In 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, Samuel was 54 years old. He heard the news at a small farmstead in Oklahoma Territory, surrounded by 3 generations of people he'd helped free. Grace, now 26, stood beside him with her own daughter, Samuel's granddaughter, named Freedom. "We did it," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "Papa, we did it. Samuel watched his granddaughter play with Cherokee children in a yard where no one wore chains, where no one owned another human being, and he thought about Running Wolf and Moses and all the others who'd died, believing this day would never come. "No," he said quietly. "We started it. The war did it. The slaves who ran did it. The abolitionists who fought did it. The Cherokee who risked everything did it. We all did it together." Ruth appeared beside them, older now, but still fierce. "Fire River did it," she said simply. "Fire River," Samuel agreed. That night, as they celebrated around fires that reminded him of another village, another time, Samuel told his granddaughter about a place that had saved him when he had nothing left, about an alliance between 2 broken peoples that became something stronger than chains or laws or hate. "Did it really exist, Grandpa?" Freedom asked, her young voice full of wonder. "Was Fire River real?" Samuel smiled and looked around at the gathered faces, black and Cherokee, young and old, survivors and descendants of survivors. He thought about Moses and Running Wolf, about plantation raids and river escapes, about Grace's rescue and countless others, about decades of small victories in a long war. "It's still real," he said. "As long as people remember what it meant. As long as we stand together against injustice. As long as we fight for each other's freedom. Fire River isn't gone. It's right here in all of us." The drums began. Cherokee rhythms blended with African patterns, a music born from shared struggle and shared hope. People danced, children played, elders told stories. And in the Oklahoma night, the spirit of Fire River lived on, not as a place on any map, but as an idea that could never be destroyed, a promise that could never be broken, that freedom could be shared, that oppressed peoples could stand together, and that no chain was strong enough to hold those who refused to be enslaved. They called it treason. The enslaved called it home. History called it resistance. Samuel just called it necessary. The alliance that terrified the masters had proven something the powerful never wanted to believe, that unity among the oppressed was the greatest threat to any system built on exploitation, that solidarity across difference was revolutionary, that freedom once tasted, could never be forgotten. Fire River fell, but its legacy burned on, passed through generations, whispered in stories, lived in every person who chose to stand with the vulnerable against the powerful. And on quiet nights, when the wind moves through the pine forests of Oklahoma, locals still say you can smell wood smoke and hear faint drums. The heartbeat of an alliance that changed history, one liberation at a time. They tried to destroy it. They never understood. Fire River was never a place to be destroyed. It was a choice, renewed every day by everyone who believed that no human being should ever own another. That choice endures. The fire still burns, and it always will.
Don't pity me. My heart doesn't need your mercy. I can still stand on my own. I was broken by your leaving, fell deeper than I thought I would. But pain has taught me how to heal now and survive what once I couldn't. You don't have to look back sadly, don't reach out with guilty hands. What you shattered made me stronger. Now I rise where I once collapsed. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll learn to breathe again. I once begged for your affection. Now I've learned my worth in scars. And the man you left in pieces found his own way through the dark. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll learn to breathe again. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll rise alone again. I'll rise alone again. They say just forget. Move on like it's easy. But forgetting you feels like remembering someone I've never seen. I've been trying to erase you from the places in my mind, but the harder that I fight it, the more you're hard to leave behind. Every memory keeps slipping through the cracks I try to close, like a face I should remember, but somehow never know. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. Every moment turns to fragments, every thought just fades to blue, like I'm searching for a feeling that still only leads to you. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. If I never met you, maybe I would know just how to heal. But now every empty moment still reminds me what is real. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true.